Hey man, the strange paradox men discover when they grow wiser is this. The more you begin to truly understand women, their psychology, their impulses, their contradictions, the harder it becomes to love them in the way you once did. When you were naive, love felt simple. You believed words at face value, gestures without suspicion, promises without doubt. But once your eyes open, once you see how much of what women do is guided, not by loyalty or reason, but by shifting emotions and subconscious instincts, something changes inside of you. That purity of affection is replaced by a cautious awareness. You no longer love blindly, you love with eyes wide open, and that shift makes love feel heavier, more complicated, and less enchanting. At first, this realization feels like betrayal. You remember how you once thought women's love was unconditional, sacred, eternal. But the more you observe, the more you realize it isn't unconditional at all. It is deeply tied to how she feels in the moment. Her attraction is often based not on your essence, but on how well you maintain the frame, the energy, the mystery that keeps her invested. When you falter, when you show too much vulnerability in the wrong way, when you lose that spark of polarity, her love doesn't simply weaken, it evaporates. And this truth cuts deep because it makes you realize she was never in love with you in the way you imagined. She was in love with the way you made her feel. And here lies the tragedy. When you start to understand this emotional foundation of female nature, you also begin to see why so many men feel blindsided by breakups, betrayals, or sudden coldness. To the man who doesn't yet understand, her withdrawal feels like cruelty. To the man who does understand, it feels like inevitability. You realize her love was always conditional on circumstances, her emotional state, her perception of your strength, her belief in your value. This awareness doesn't make you bitter at first, but it does make it harder to love with the same abandon. Because how do you give your heart fully to someone whose affection shifts with the weather of her feelings? The more you understand women, the more contradictions you notice in their behavior. They say they want stability, yet they crave unpredictability. They say they want a man who shows emotion, yet they lose interest when he becomes too vulnerable. They say they want commitment, yet they are drawn to the excitement of danger. And while these contradictions don't make them bad, they make them unpredictable. You realize that loving them means constantly walking a tightrope between giving enough and giving too much, between being available and being mysterious, between being stable and being exciting. This balancing act feels less like love and more like strategy. And strategy is exhausting when what you longed for was simplicity. But perhaps the hardest truth of all is this. Once you understand women, you see that much of what you mistook for love was projection, hers and yours. She projected her fantasies onto you, seeing not who you are, but who she wanted you to be. And you did the same, projecting purity, loyalty, and permanence onto her emotions. When those projections shatter, you're left with reality. And reality is this. Women live more in their emotions than in their commitments, and their feelings for you are only as stable as the emotions you can continuously inspire. Loving them with this knowledge is hard because it means you must accept that her love is never a fixed possession. It is a temporary experience, fragile, fleeting, and always dependent on the moment. What makes this realization even more difficult for men is the way it changes how you interpret their words and actions. Before, when a woman said, "I'll love you forever," you believed it meant forever. But once you understand women, you know that phrase actually means, "I love how I feel right now, and I want this feeling to last forever." The difference is subtle but profound. You realize she wasn't lying, she was sincere in the moment, but her sincerity has an expiration date tied to her emotions, and that awareness erodes the innocence of love. You can't hear those words without translating them in your mind, without recognizing the fragile foundation on which they rest. It's not that she deceived you, it's that she deceives herself, and by extension you. And once you know this, it becomes impossible to return to the unguarded faith you once had. As you grow wiser, you also see the role society plays in feeding women illusions about love. From movies, songs, and stories, they are told that love is supposed to feel like fireworks, that relationships should be a constant rush of passion, that men exist to fulfill their emotional fantasies. So when reality inevitably falls short of that ideal, they don't question the fantasy, they question the man, and this becomes the silent tragedy of modern love. Men are judged not by who they are, but by how well they can sustain a fantasy that was never real to begin with. Once you understand this, it becomes hard to love with the same openness, Because you realize you're not just competing with other men, you're competing with an illusion that lives inside her mind, an illusion you can never fully satisfy. Understanding women also reveals the transactional nature of much of their affection. You begin to see that, consciously or unconsciously, many women evaluate men based on what they can provide: attention, security, status, excitement. If you meet those needs, she feels desire. If you fail, her attraction wanes. This truth is not necessarily malicious, it's instinctual. But once you see it, love feels less like destiny and more like negotiation. You realize her feelings for you are not anchored in your soul, but in what you bring to her experience. And that realization robs love of its romantic mystique. You start to ask yourself, does she love me, or does she love what I represent in her life right now? That question, once planted in your mind, never leaves, and it makes every expression of her affection feel conditional, no matter how sweet it sounds. Another weight of understanding is the recognition of how often women contradict their own desires. They say they want a man who listens, yet they're drawn to men who ignore them. They say they want safety, yet they fall for men who bring chaos. They say they want equality, yet they secretly respect men who lead with authority. These contradictions don't make them insincere, they make them human, shaped by instincts and culture colliding. But for a man who sees clearly, it makes love feel unstable, because you realize she doesn't even fully understand what she wants, which means her commitment to you can change without her even knowing why. She could wake up one day and decide she no longer feels the same, and in her mind, it will feel as real as the love she once swore was eternal. Loving with that knowledge is like standing on shifting ground. You never know when it will move beneath you, and perhaps the deepest wound of understanding is the way it strips away the illusion of permanence. You realize that love, in the way women experience it, is not a foundation but a wave, rising, crashing, shifting with the tides of her emotions and circumstances. That doesn't mean women are incapable of loyalty, but it means their loyalty is far more fragile than men often believe. Once you see this clearly, you can never unsee it. You can no longer believe in fairy tales about forever. And while this clarity may save you from heartbreak, it also makes love harder to give. Because how do you surrender fully to someone when you know their affection is conditional, their loyalty is situational, and their feelings are as temporary as the seasons? That is the burden of understanding women. It protects your heart, but it also hardens it. The further you go down this path of understanding, the more you start to see patterns that repeat across women's behavior, regardless of age, culture, or background. You notice how quickly feelings can shift, how effortlessly words spoken with conviction one day can be replaced with entirely new ones the next. And this realization creates a kind of disillusionment in men. It's not that you hate women, it's that you can no longer pretend their love is the same as yours. Men tend to love with permanence. Once a woman has his heart, it can take years, even decades, to truly let go. Women, on the other hand, can pivot swiftly, moving from one love to another without the same lingering attachment. And once you recognize this, it becomes hard to invest your soul into someone whose way of loving operates on such different terms. What complicates this even further is the way society excuses this instability while holding men to impossible standards. Men are expected to be consistent, dependable, unwavering providers of love and stability. But when women shift, when they change their minds, when they leave, it is framed as following their heart or outgrowing the relationship. Men are shamed for not giving enough, while women are praised for choosing themselves. Once you see this double standard clearly, it eats away at your ability to love with openness. Because now, love feels less like a partnership and more like a one-sided responsibility where you are expected to be solid, no matter what, while she is free to move as her emotions dictate, and that imbalance poisons the purity of love. Understanding women also reveals the influence of external forces on their feelings. Social media, friends, culture, and trends all play a role in shaping how she views you in the relationship. One day, she's content. The next, she sees an image online of a man buying his girlfriend flowers, and suddenly you're failing her. Another day, her friend tells her that real love should feel like a movie, and she starts questioning whether what you share is enough. When you were naive, you believed her feelings came from her heart. Once you understand women, you see how often those feelings are borrowed from outside influences, and that knowledge makes it harder to love fully, because you know her perception of you is not entirely her own. It is filtered through a world that constantly tells her she deserves more. This awareness leads to another painful truth. Once you understand women, you begin to see how fragile their loyalty can be when tested by temptation. Men often imagine that love protects them, that if she loves you, she would never betray you, but the reality is more nuanced. Women can feel deep love in one moment and still act on impulse in another. They can justify betrayal by saying, "I wasn't happy," or "it just happened." And once you see how easily emotions can override loyalty, your trust erodes. You stop believing in promises made in the heat of passion, because you know how quickly those promises dissolve under pressure. Loving with this knowledge feels like leaving your heart in someone else's hands, knowing they might drop it the second they're distracted by a new thrill. Perhaps the cruelest part of understanding women is how it changes the way you look back on your past. You remember old relationships, old words, old gestures of love, and you begin to reinterpret them through this new lens. Things that once felt pure now look like emotional games. Acts of affection that once seemed eternal now appear as fleeting highs. You realize she wasn't lying when she said she loved you. She simply meant it in the moment, and nothing beyond it. That retrospective clarity can be crushing because it taints your memories. The woman you thought would stand by you forever wasn't evil, but she was driven by forces she herself didn't fully understand. And knowing this doesn't bring you peace. It makes it harder to trust love in the future. Because if even your most cherished memories were built on temporary feelings, how can you ever surrender fully again? The deeper you dive into female psychology, the more you see how much of their love is performative rather than permanent. A woman can shower you with affection, send long paragraphs, cry in your arms, and in that moment, every part of you believes she's genuine, and she is. But what you come to realize is that her genuineness is limited to the present. If tomorrow her feelings shift, she won't look back and think, "I was lying then." She will think, "That was real then, and this is real now." That distinction is what separates men from women in love. Men look at love as a line extending forward. Women see it as snapshots strung together by feelings. When you recognize this, your heart hardens. You no longer believe that gestures mean permanence. You start to view every affectionate act as a fleeting moment, not a foundation. And that change makes it nearly impossible to receive love the same way again. Understanding women also forces you to confront the selfish core of their emotional nature. While men are conditioned to sacrifice, to protect, and to provide, women are conditioned to prioritize how they feel in the relationship. If she feels adored, she calls it love. If she feels neglected, she calls it betrayal, even if your actions haven't changed. You realize that much of her loyalty is tied not to who you are, but to how she feels in your presence. And that truth creates a barrier in your heart. Because how can you give unselfishly to someone who measures love through the lens of her own emotions while rarely weighing the sacrifices you make? The more you see this imbalance, the harder it becomes to love without caution, because love begins to look less like partnership and more like performance. This understanding also shatters the illusion of equality in love. Society tells men and women that love is mutual, that both give and both sacrifice. But once you look closely, you see the imbalance. You see how men fall harder, stay longer, and carry more emotional weight when things fall apart. You see how women, despite all their words of forever, are often quicker to leave when their needs are no longer met. And this knowledge bruises your ability to love freely. Because love, in its purest form, requires vulnerability. It requires you to put down your guard and trust that she will hold your heart carefully. But once you've seen how quickly she can walk away, how easily her emotions can flip, you hesitate. You begin to love with one foot already out the door, and that guardedness, while protective, kills the purity of love before it even begins. The hardest part of understanding women is that it creates a split in your soul. You still crave love, but you no longer believe in it the way you once did. You want to feel the warmth of affection, the closeness of connection, but deep down, you know it's temporary. You know it's conditional. You know her words today may not be her words tomorrow, and so you wrestle with yourself. Do you stay blind and enjoy the illusion, or do you stay aware and protect yourself from heartbreak? Neither option feels satisfying. Blind love leads to pain. Guarded love leads to emptiness. This is the paradox men face once they truly understand women. It's not that you don't want to love, it's that you can't love without seeing the fragility built into it. And yet the most sobering truth of all is this: once you understand women, you begin to realize why so many older men grow detached, stoic, even cynical about love. It's not because they hate women, it's because they've lived long enough to see patterns repeat, promises break, and feelings vanish without warning. They've seen the truth beneath the romance. That much of what women call love is closer to a dream than a commitment. And once you've seen the truth, you can't go back to the dream. Loving women becomes harder not because you lack affection, but because you now demand something deeper, something real, something consistent, something most of them cannot give. And until you find that rare exception, you carry the weight of knowledge, and that weight makes every I love you sound hollow, every promise feel fragile, every embrace taste of impermanence. As you continue to peel back the layers, another truth reveals itself. Love, as women experience it, is often reactive, not proactive. She doesn't sit down and decide, I will love this man no matter what. Instead, her emotions flare and fade in response to how you make her feel at any given time. If you excite her, she feels in love. If you bore her, she feels distant. If another man triggers stronger emotions, her love for you weakens, not because she chose it, but because she reacts to it. And once you understand this, it strips away the fantasy that her love was ever rooted in something unshakable. You realize that what you thought was devotion was often just reaction. That makes it hard to love without suspicion, because every affectionate word she speaks now carries the shadow of instability. This knowledge also opens your eyes to the masks women wear in relationships. When you are new, she presents her best self, charming, affectionate, supportive, and eager to impress. But as time goes on, the mask begins to slip, and her true patterns emerge. It's not that she set out to deceive you, it's that women often confuse their own performance for genuine identity. They convince themselves that the effort they put in during the early stages is who they really are. But when that effort fades, they justify it as, you changed, when in reality, the illusion simply collapsed. Understanding this makes you wary. You no longer trust the first version of her you meet, because you know it's temporary. And how can you fully love someone when you're constantly waiting for the mask to fall? What's even more difficult is the way understanding women forces you to confront your own vulnerability. When you were naive, you gave freely, not realizing the risks. But once you've seen how fragile female love can be, every gesture of affection feels like a gamble. You start to question yourself before giving too much. Will this be appreciated, or will it be taken for granted? Will this loyalty be returned, or will it be discarded the moment she feels different? That internal questioning erodes the spontaneity of love. You can no longer give without calculating, no longer trust without second-guessing. And while this protects you from heartbreak, it also robs you of joy. Because love, to feel alive, requires risk, and once you understand women, the risk feels too heavy to bear. Another consequence of this understanding is that it changes the way you see men who are still blind. You look at younger men pouring their hearts into women, believing in forever, and part of you envies them. You envy their ignorance, their ability to love without suspicion, but another part of you pities them, because you know what's coming. You know the day will arrive when they realize the truth. You now carry that her love is not as unconditional as they thought, that her loyalty is not as permanent as they believed, that her affection can vanish without warning. And when that day comes, they too will struggle to love with the same purity ever again. The cycle repeats, generation after generation, as men discover truths they never wanted but can no longer unlearn. Perhaps the most sobering realization of all is this: the more you understand women, the more you recognize that what most men call love is not truly love, it's attachment, projection, or desire disguised as something deeper. And when you see through those layers, love loses its magic. You no longer chase it as salvation, because you know it cannot deliver what you once believed. Instead, you view it as a temporary union of needs, sustained only as long as both sides remain satisfied. That truth hardens your heart, not into bitterness, but into clarity. And with that clarity, you begin to ask yourself, is love even worth pursuing when it is so fragile, so conditional, so easily broken? And that question itself makes love harder to give, because once you've asked it, you can never go back to blind devotion again. The more you peel back the truth, the more you begin to realize that women themselves don't fully understand the nature of their own love. Ask a woman if she loves unconditionally, and she will swear that she does. She'll insist that her devotion is permanent, that nothing could ever change the way she feels, and in that moment, she believes it. But feelings are not built to last. They are built to shift with time, with circumstances, with new emotions. What she means when she says forever is actually as long as I feel this way. And when those feelings fade, so does her version of love. Once you grasp this, you stop taking her words at face value. You begin to listen, not to what she says, but to what she does over time. And more often than not, her actions betray the temporary nature of what once sounded eternal. Understanding women also makes you notice how quickly their affection can be replaced. A man, when heartbroken, can spend years haunted by the ghost of the woman he lost. He holds on to her memory, replays every detail, and struggles to replace her in his heart. But for many women, once they've emotionally detached, they move on with astonishing speed. What you thought was love, strong enough to last forever, can vanish in weeks, even days. This isn't because they never cared, it's because their love was always tied to how they felt in the present, not to the permanence of the bond. And when they find new excitement, their old devotion feels like a faded photograph. This realization leaves men cold, because once you've seen how easily love can be swapped out, it's difficult to ever believe in permanence again. What deepens the struggle is the realization that much of what men interpret as love from women is actually survival instinct. A woman loves the man who provides stability, protection, or status, not always because she truly values him, but because her survival and comfort are tied to him. Remove the stability, and her affection fades. Replace him with someone who offers more, and her loyalty shifts. This transactional nature of female love is devastating for men to process, because men often fall in love with the person, not the benefit. They attach to her essence, her presence, her being. But once you realize her attachment to you may be tied to what you offer instead of who you are, it makes every relationship feel fragile, conditional, and ultimately disposable. You also come to see that women live more comfortably with contradiction than men do. A man craves consistency. He wants love to mean today what it meant yesterday, and what it will mean tomorrow. But a woman can tell you she loves you deeply one day and act coldly the next, without ever seeing the contradiction. She will justify it by saying, "My feelings changed," as if that explains the inconsistency. And in her world, it does. But for men, this creates dissonance. How can something so sacred fluctuate so easily? How can someone who swore you were their everything suddenly treat you like nothing? This inconsistency is one of the hardest things to reconcile once you understand women. It forces you to guard your heart, because you know that devotion today doesn't guarantee devotion tomorrow. Perhaps the heaviest burden of all is that once you've seen these truths, you can't unsee them. The illusions that once made love sweet, the promises of forever, the gestures of loyalty, the words of devotion, no longer carry the same weight. You look at them and think, I know how fragile this really is. You know that her always may last until someone better appears. You know that her loyalty may vanish when circumstances change. You know that her love, no matter how intense, may fade the moment the feelings shift. And this knowledge creates a wall inside of you. You can still care, still enjoy the connection, still crave intimacy, but the depth of your love is tempered by caution. And in that caution, love loses its innocence. It becomes less about giving freely and more about managing risk. That change alone makes it harder to love, because without innocence, love no longer feels pure. When you begin to see love as risk management rather than blind devotion, it changes the way you approach women entirely. You no longer believe in the fairy tale of eternal loyalty. Instead, you see relationships for what they are: conditional arrangements based on needs, emotions, and timing. This doesn't mean you can't enjoy them, but it does mean you stop sacrificing yourself on the altar of a woman's promises. You become more detached, more measured, more aware of the expiration date written invisibly on every bond. And while this awareness protects you, it also robs you of the reckless passion men used to feel when they believed in forever. Once you see the game, you can't go back to playing it with childlike faith. You now play with strategy, with boundaries, with distance, and that makes love feel less like surrender and more like negotiation. The hardest pill to swallow is realizing that for most women, love and respect are not the same thing. A woman can claim to love you, yet disrespect you in the same breath. She can adore you while secretly undermining your authority, questioning your decisions, or comparing you to other men. This duality confuses men who equate love with loyalty and honor. But once you understand women, you see the separation clearly. Her emotions may tell her she loves you, but her nature may drive her to test you, to challenge you, even to belittle you at times. And the moment she feels she no longer looks up to you, her love will quickly curdle into resentment. Understanding this truth makes it harder to love, because you know that without her respect, her love has no foundation, and respect is far rarer than affection in the modern world. Another layer of difficulty comes from recognizing how much external influence shapes a woman's perception of love. Movies, social media, friends, and culture feed her a constant diet of unrealistic expectations. She is told that love should feel magical at all times, that the man who truly cares will never falter, never struggle, never disappoint. And when her reality doesn't match the fantasy she's absorbed, she begins to doubt you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because she's been conditioned to expect more than any man can give. Once you understand this, you realize you're not just competing with other men, you're competing with fantasies, with highlight reels, with illusions, and that battle is unwinnable. Knowing this makes it difficult to love without reservation, because you understand she may never fully appreciate reality as long as she's chasing dreams fed to her by a world addicted to fiction. This is why so many men become emotionally withdrawn after gaining real understanding of women. They can still enjoy intimacy, still feel attraction, still share moments of connection, but they no longer open their hearts the same way. They no longer believe in undying devotion, because they've seen how quickly it can dissolve. They no longer believe in unconditional love, because they've seen the conditions firsthand, and as a result, their version of love becomes guarded, controlled, almost clinical. They give, but not too much. They commit, but not completely. They care, but never enough to let it destroy them. And while this protects them from devastation, it also leaves them unable to feel the wild abandon of love that once defined their youth. Understanding has replaced innocence, and with it, love has lost its magic. But here's the paradox. Once you understand women at this level, you also gain a strange kind of power. You stop being manipulated by illusions. You stop being blindsided by sudden shifts in emotion. You stop losing yourself in relationships that were never built to last. And that clarity, while it makes love harder, also makes you stronger. You no longer love blindly, you love with vision. You no longer give endlessly, you give with discernment. You no longer believe every promise. You watch patterns, consistency, and actions. And though this might strip away the sweetness of innocence, it arms you with wisdom that prevents destruction. The cost is high, you'll never love the same way again, but the reward is peace. A peace rooted in reality, not in fantasy. And for many men, that trade-off, painful as it is, becomes the only way to survive love in a world where illusions are more common than truth. Once you reach this level of clarity, something subtle but powerful happens inside you. You stop chasing validation through love. You no longer need a woman's affection to prove your worth. Before, love felt like the ultimate prize, the thing that would complete you. Now, you recognize that most of what women call love is an emotional state, a fluctuating condition that can vanish without warning. With this understanding, you start building validation from within, from your achievements, your purpose, your discipline, your brothers, and your craft. That shift is liberating, but also isolating, because now when women come into your life, you see them not as saviors but as companions, temporary, conditional, replaceable, and though that mindset shields you from devastation, it also makes it almost impossible to lose yourself in love the way you once did. As you see more clearly, you also recognize the cycle most women unconsciously run: idealization, disappointment, withdrawal. At first, they build you up into something larger than life. They project fantasies onto you, seeing not your flaws but the image of the man they dreamed of. You enjoy this stage because it feels like real love, but deep down you know it's unsustainable. Inevitably, reality intrudes. She sees you for who you are, a man with flaws, limitations, and humanity. The disappointment sets in, and suddenly the affection begins to cool. Where she once adored you, she now questions you. Where she once respected you, she now criticizes you. And eventually she withdraws, sometimes slowly, sometimes overnight. Once you've seen this pattern enough, you stop believing in the permanence of love. You start seeing it as a temporary storm of emotion that always fades into silence. This awareness hardens men. It doesn't turn them cruel, but it makes them colder. They begin to understand that women's loyalty is rarely about who you are at your core. It's about how you make her feel, how stable your frame is, how exciting you remain. And since emotions change, loyalty becomes fragile. For the man who still believes in unconditional love, this realization feels devastating. For the man who accepts it, it becomes armor. He stops expecting women to be what they cannot be. He stops resenting them for being who they are. And instead of trying to squeeze permanence out of impermanence, he adjusts his mindset. Enjoy the highs while they last. Protect yourself from the lows, and never sacrifice your core identity in the hope of preserving her love. That kind of cold acceptance is the only way to stay sane once you've seen behind the curtain. The irony, of course, is that women are often drawn most strongly to the man who loves the least. They sense his detachment, his refusal to be consumed, and it makes him magnetic. Why? Because women crave polarity. They are pulled toward the man who cannot be controlled, who does not bend to every emotional demand. And yet for the man who understands women, this dynamic is bittersweet. He knows that his strength attracts her, but he also knows that if he ever softens too much, if he ever surrenders fully, the attraction will fade. This creates a cruel loop. Love dies when he gives too much, and desire thrives when he withholds. The more he understands this, the harder it becomes to love openly, because he knows that in her psychology, the man who never collapses is the man she never leaves. By now you start to see why wisdom and innocence can't coexist in love. To love blindly, you must be ignorant of the patterns, the psychology, the contradictions. To stay naive, you must ignore the reality of shifting emotions, cultural conditioning, and hypergamy. But once you've seen it all, once you've studied the cycles, felt the betrayals, endured the withdrawals, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to believing that love is eternal. You can't pretend her affection today guarantees her loyalty tomorrow. And this is the bitter reward of understanding. You gain clarity, but you lose romance. You gain peace, but you lose enchantment. You gain control, but you lose abandon. And though that trade is heavy, it is also liberating. Because once you stop expecting permanence from something designed to be temporary, you stop living in disappointment. You accept love for what it is, fleeting, conditional, fragile, and in that acceptance you find strength. When you carry this awareness long enough, you begin to approach relationships with a kind of stoic detachment that feels foreign to men who haven't woken up yet. You no longer chase butterflies or adrenaline highs. You no longer stay up at night, deciphering mixed signals or overanalyzing her words. Instead, you observe. You let her actions speak. You let her patterns reveal themselves, and you quietly decide what role, if any, she should play in your life. This calm observation doesn't mean you're emotionless. It means you're disciplined, and that discipline protects you from the traps so many men fall into. While others are bending themselves to fit a woman's shifting needs, you remain centered, and in that centeredness, you regain a sense of power. Men lose when they make love their religion, but the more you embrace this grounded frame, the more you realize why so many women find it frustrating. Women thrive on emotional chaos. They stir it, they live in it, and they test men through it. When you refuse to react, when you refuse to collapse, when you refuse to beg for clarity, you deny them the drama that fuels their emotional world. To her, this silence can feel suffocating because it removes her leverage, and paradoxically, it also makes her respect you more. She may call you cold, detached, or distant, but deep down she knows that you're the kind of man she cannot manipulate into submission, and that mixture of frustration and admiration is precisely what keeps her orbiting you, even when she tries to push you away. Understanding women deeply also exposes how fragile their love can be compared to a man's. Men can love in a way that endures hardship, poverty, and struggle. A man will remain loyal to a woman who stands by him, even if life isn't perfect. But a woman's love is often tethered to conditions: her comfort, her excitement, her emotional fulfillment. When those conditions fade, her affection often fades with them. And once you grasp this truth, you can no longer romanticize her loyalty. You see it for what it is, a reflection of her current satisfaction rather than a commitment carved into stone. This doesn't mean you grow bitter, but it does mean you stop pretending that her devotion is eternal. You accept that her love is real today, but could vanish tomorrow, and you build your life in a way that never collapses when it does. This shift in perception also frees you from the desperate need to prove yourself to women. Men who don't understand female psychology spend their lives in constant performance, buying gifts, sending long messages, adjusting their personalities, all in an attempt to lock down her love. But once you understand that love cannot be locked, only experienced, you stop performing, you stop begging, you stop selling yourself like a product. Instead, you build your value for yourself, for your mission, for your peace of mind. Women may come and go, but your standards remain. And ironically, this very detachment makes you far more attractive than the men who burn themselves out chasing approval. By not needing her love, you create the very conditions where she wants to give it most. Still, the cost of this awareness is heavy, because when you stop needing her love, you also stop believing in it fully. You can enjoy it, you can bask in it, you can appreciate it, but you never fully surrender to it. The innocence of being swept away in passion is gone. You can't close your eyes and believe it will last forever. You can't silence the part of your mind that whispers, "This too shall fade." And that whisper keeps you from drowning in her love, but it also keeps you from soaring in it. Understanding makes you cautious, and caution keeps you safe, but it also keeps you grounded. When once you might have flown, This is why the more you understand women, the harder it becomes to love them with abandon. You've seen too much to ever go blind again. At times, this awareness will feel like both a blessing and a curse. You'll look at men still trapped in the cycle, confused by mixed signals, devastated by breakups, destroyed by betrayal, and you'll be grateful that you've risen above it, but you'll also envy them in a small way, because they can still feel something you no longer can. They can still believe, still hope, still lose themselves in the fantasy of unconditional love. You, however, can't, and while that saves you from destruction, it also robs you of innocence. This is the trade of wisdom: safety for passion, clarity for magic, control for surrender. And once you've made the trade, you can never go back. Yet this doesn't mean love is impossible, it simply means you redefine it. Instead of seeking fairy tales, you seek alignment. Instead of demanding permanence, you demand consistency. Instead of craving fireworks, you crave peace. And when you find a woman who can meet you there, not in fantasy but in reality, you appreciate her without illusion. You don't idolize her, but you don't dismiss her either. You see her clearly, flaws and all, and you still choose to share your life with her. That kind of love may lack the intoxicating highs of youthful passion, but it carries something far more valuable: stability. And stability, once you've seen the chaos of illusion, is the only thing worth building on. The true power of understanding women lies in what it does for you as a man. It forces you to stop outsourcing your happiness to others. It forces you to stop expecting women to be your anchor. It forces you to confront your own weakness, your own need for validation, your own hunger for illusion. And once you face those parts of yourself, you begin to grow. You stop chasing love as salvation and start creating a life that doesn't crumble without it. This growth makes you dangerous in the best way, because now, no woman can manipulate you with affection. No woman can control you with withdrawal. And no woman can break you by leaving. You have become sovereign, and sovereignty is something no illusion can threaten. And here is the final paradox. Once you reach this level, some women will love you more fiercely than ever. Because women are instinctively drawn to men they cannot break, men they cannot control, men they cannot fully possess. Your refusal to surrender completely makes you magnetic. Your calm detachment makes you powerful. Your ability to walk away makes you irreplaceable. She may never understand why, but she will feel it deeply, and this is where your strength lies, not in being loved blindly, but in being respected profoundly. And while that respect may not feel like the intoxicating love you once believed in, it is far stronger. It is the kind of bond that endures when passion fades, because it is built not on fantasy but on truth. So yes, the more you understand women, the harder it becomes to love them with innocence. You lose the magic, the blindness, the fairy tale, but you gain something far more important: freedom. Freedom from manipulation, freedom from heartbreak, freedom from illusions that were never meant to last. You may never love the way you once did, but you will never be destroyed the way you once were. And in that balance lies the deeper truth, that love is not meant to enslave you, but to complement the life you've already built. And once you understand women, you no longer live for their love, you live for your purpose, your vision, your truth. And if love fits into that, good. If not, you remain whole. And that, in the end, is the highest power a man can ever achieve.